What is exactly decentralized science?
DeSci is looking at the scientific system, this knowledge discovery process, the system of like product development as well, and saying, how can we make it more efficient with the blockchain?
What problems currently in the status quo are you trying to solve?
The system as it is fairly efficient, but it just has flaws. We can make it more efficient by adding things like cryptography, things like tokens, and incentives to the scientific apparatus.
A lot of people say that DeSci is a scam. What do you say to them?
I think those trust issues will exist for a long time. We're running cool science. We are developing products that are valuable, and yeah, we will earn that trust. My name is Benji Leibowitz. I'm the founder of Pump.Science, and you're listening to the Innovation Civilization podcast.
All right. Beautiful. Benji, welcome to the Innovation Civilization podcast. What a great pleasure to have you here today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. All right. So let's start off with kind of seeing and understanding and defining what we actually mean when we say decentralized science. So from what I understand, science is basically you do some bunch of experiments, right? You get data and then you try to replicate the same experiments in order to find the truth, basically, right? So just for our audience who have zero idea about what decentralized science is, and as I was like preparing for this podcast, I didn't want to overly prepare in a way that I just want to have a conversation as a lay person with you, just so we kind of understand. So speaking that goalpost a little bit, like what is exactly decentralized science in very simple terms?
Well, I think honestly, the right place to start is kind of where you started, which is what science is, right?
Yeah.
Science is a discovery process of the truth, right? And so one uses the scientific method, which is like proposing hypotheses, running experiments, and kind of like limiting your uncertainty about the world. So, one can think about it as truth. Another way to think about it is like reducing your uncertainty about the world, right? So it's not this and it's not that, but it's like, somewhere in between this and this. So yeah, science is that discovery process. Most science as we understand it is done kind of either in academic institutions like universities, which is where like a lot of the high science happens, but I think from a lot of the innovation that's going on, especially in AI, it's actually happening quite a bit in industry as well. So a lot of companies are now innovating on our frontier of understanding. One could say that most academics are much more purists about like finding the truth, not necessarily making products that are, are commercializable. They're not necessarily tied. Engineering is kind of like applied science, but maybe coming back to your question of like, what is DeSci? DeSci is basically looking at the scientific system, this knowledge discovery process, but also like the system of like products development as well, and saying, how can we make it more efficient with, basically blockchain? People will say like, decentralized ledger technologies, but what they really mean is blockchain. So how can we use, all of the cryptographic tools and a ledger of record tech that blockchain brings and make science more efficient?
That's really interesting. And when you say it makes science more efficient, that suggests that currently it has inefficiencies, right? So like, what are those that you're talking about? What problems currently in the status quo are you trying to solve, basically, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a number of them.
Yeah.
But I think and we're by no means more efficient than the existing system. But that's the goal, right?
I see.
The system as it is fairly efficient, but it just has flaws. And we have hypotheses that we can, make it more efficient by adding things like cryptography, things like tokens and incentives to the scientific apparatus. So some of the inefficiencies, and I think the ones that we're specifically focused on, so maybe we're more qualified to talk about, is specifically around like intellectual property. So intellectual property is kind of like how we take our knowledge and protect our discoveries such that we can commercialize them, right? So the process of discovery is expensive, and it requires a lot of human effort. And the question is like, why do it? Some people do it for the sake of it, but to make it sustainable, you need to create incentives to create new knowledge. And so what most governments do is they have intellectual property systems. And what this does is it allows you to protect what you've discovered so you can commercialize it for a period of time, right? And no one else can produce it. And so basically it's a contract between you as an inventor and the state, right? Like nation states, to protect your invention so that you can go make a product and nobody else can, to give you kind of an advantage because it is your invention. So it's a beautiful system. it certainly incentivizes invention, but it has its flaws. And so a lot of what we're working on is to disrupt that. Another big issue with the existing academic system, and it's coming to light now with the change in administration in the US, with like the NIH, the National Institute of Health, which provides a lot of academic grant funding to researchers in the US. A lot of that funding is being cut or like called into question. And so I think this problem of science funding is becoming, top of mind for a lot of people. And so the funding system is also quite inefficient. We can get into the details of both, but those are kind of like IP and funding are two big problems that we're trying to attack.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. So let's talk about the first one. I guess you mentioned IP. IP law has been around for forever, basically, right? And I guess for some industries it works better than others. Like open source is better, and so many other industries basically in tech, and software and so on and so forth. Whereas IP and all that kind of stuff feels like it's a bit more hardware and harder stuff, like atoms, the world of atoms, you have some more IP stuff, right? And it's certainly fallen less important in the last decade or so, having IP. Previously I just remember, like, if you're a company, like, 40 years ago, like everything you just, patented or like, something like that, basically, right? But now it's like, oh yeah, no longer IP is such an issue, right? But I guess you're working in more like drug discovery, would you say? Or like, yeah, what angle are you coming at? And then like, what problems are you trying to solve in IP space? Yeah.
Yeah. So the area of research we're specifically interested in disrupting first is biomedical research.
Okay.
But I think it's super interesting that you talk about like how important patents used to be, how they're becoming less important, how there's kind of more of a lean into open source.
Yeah.
And I think maybe just like double clicking on that a bit, it's kind of interesting to think about like, why is that? And is it this distinction between atoms and bits? Is IP useful for atoms but not bits? Like, what is it about bits that make it less suitable for IP? There's a lot. I mean, you could hypothesize about this and philosophize about it all day. I think what's interesting to, or what I think is like the most compelling reason for this is the world of bits moves so fast. It moves at the speed of light. And so many of the tech companies are just becoming so accelerationist that by the time you've like filed for a patent and like gotten the patent granted, it's already irrelevant. There's already like, a new state of the art. And so it doesn't even like, by the time you get the protection's no longer necessary. I think it's and here's the distinction with atoms. It's like atoms are much harder to put together and, build into novel ways that are useful for society. And so patents, definitely serve a larger role. Not to say they don't serve a role in software. Some of the most valuable patent ever was the CDMA technology out of Qualcomm, which is basically like the basis for modern day communications.
I see. Is that a hardware pattern, you mean?
No, I think it's a communication protocol.
CDMA. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
But so it's not to say that it's not valuable, but it's more just like, I think it is much more important now in hardware than software, because software moves so quickly that the patent system can't keep up with it. And so I think that's even more of a reason to try and figure out how it can be disrupted, if that makes sense. So yeah, we work more in the biomedical space where the patent system is surely broken. And there's a few reasons for that. So number one, the way patents work, and patents are basically inventions that you register with the government where they give you basically 20 years of exclusivity in the market. So what that means is if you discover a drug and you want to sell that drug to patients, nobody else can sell it for 20 years, right? So there was a time where Advil, ibuprofen, was the only ibuprofen on the market. And then, the patent expired, and then generics manufacturers come in, and, you can now go get, off-brand Advil for extremely cheap, right? And so that basically brings down the cost of ibuprofen to basically the cost to produce it, right? The margins go down a lot because there's no more exclusivity. You aren't the only game in town. There's competition, right? And we think that's actually kind of a broken system. It works in a lot of cases, but I think if you look at the cost of drugs in the US, they're becoming super expensive, right? So it's basically like kind of bankrupting America, to have this patent system. And so I think that's one big issue, right? Is specifically that it's basically drug companies are forced to increase their prices significantly because they only have 20 years of exclusivity.
Okay.
So basically after 20 years, that drug becomes essentially not totally worthless, but basically worthless, right?
So they have to make up all the money in 20 years, so they jack up the price of selling.
Okay. They have to, and people criticize them. And as someone who's trying to disrupt the pharma industry, one must sympathize with the fact that they have no choice but to charge super high pricing to make up for all of the R&D costs and the limited time to monetize.
Which can take years as well, right? Basically 10 years of R&D, and you don't know what percentage of those are going to do the home run, basically, right?
So whatever, the home run only lasts, and by the time you've patented it and run the trials, you only have 10 years for that home run to pay off, right? So you have to charge a lot for it. So, as much as one would like to criticize big pharma, I think that one should not criticize them because of the broken patent system.
Yeah, but it's not a U.S. problem specifically, though, right? I mean, the patent system in 20 years applies globally, I believe. I don't know.
I mean, there's the European Patent Office, there's Australian Patent Office, Japan. There's so a lot of these broader jurisdictions have patent offices. But the U.S. is really the country that pays for most of the medicines, right? A lot of countries are like single payer, like you're in the UK. The NHS is like the main payer of medicines there. They won't pay the same prices that American insurance companies will pay.
Have you come across Cost Plus Drugs by Mark
Absolutely.
Cuban? Absolutely. So he's trying to tackle that problem, right? That basically,
totally.
What do you think of that, basically?
I think it's super innovative. And I think that somebody had to disrupt the pharmacy benefits managers, which is what he's trying to disrupt specifically, which is just basically like a new entity in the healthcare industry that didn't exist before. This is kind of a middleman and takes friction costs and, doesn't add as much value as they capture. And so, he's an entrepreneur. He saw an opportunity to kind of squeeze them out and remove a middleman and bring value back to consumers. And he's doing that. Yeah,
I guess you're trying to solve the problem at a more upstream, basically, of the value chain, right? Okay, cool. Let's continue. So you said that costs are an issue because limited 20 years of patent, right? And what else, basically?
Yeah, so I think another big issue is that after that 20 years, there's no longer an incentive to further understand, does that drug actually solve another condition, right? So, there very well may be like let's pretend ibuprofen cures some rare type of cancer. There's no incentive for a pharmaceutical company to then go invest into the clinical trials to demonstrate that because the patent life is over. So there are some more market exclusivity agreements that the FDA will give you, but they're not enough for pharma companies to invest into it. So the IP system doesn't protect people and incentivize them to then go and find repurposing plays for drugs. So, these drugs that have gone through the entire clinical trial pathway have been shown to be safe and effective for a specific disease. There's no incentive to repurpose them for another disease, even if they may be very effective because they're off patent. So not only are you with a 20-year patent system forcing super high drug costs at the beginning, but you're also destroying the incentive to, further develop that drug after 10 years for new diseases.
Can I ask you a rookie question? And I don't know the answer to this, maybe you know better, but I can understand 20, 30 years ago, if you bring a novel drug to the market, you've got exclusivity as a company and no one has that piece of tech basically, or reverse engineer anything like that. But today, if I see something like a COVID vaccine or something like that, so someone comes up with a DNA based approach, someone comes up with an RNA based approach, and it's different pieces of tech basically, right? But it's kind of solving the same problem. So if there is a drug that I make today and it's quite useful, are you saying that there are no competitors that are going to come up in that 20-year window at all, basically?
There absolutely may be, but they can't have exclusivity in the market. So they have to wait. They have to wait until the exclusivity period is over. In the pharmaceutical industry, it's called loss of exclusivity, LOE.
Okay.
And it's just basically this kind of cliff of value.
Yeah. But they can always try to have another drug using a slightly different piece of tech, basically. Let's call it, or whatever, code.
Totally.
Yeah. Tackling the same problem, right? Yeah.
For some types of drugs, they're called biosimilars. Others they're called like analogs.
Sure.
A lot of people call them like Me Too drugs, right? Which are different Me Too.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
But yeah, so you're precisely right. But there's a huge first mover advantage.
I see. Okay.
So there's that as well. But yeah, no. What you're saying is absolutely true. But yeah, I mean, like it's still wasted money, right? For a bunch of other companies to go out and try and make a competitor that is just slightly different enough that they can not be violating the patent, right? Like it's just a poor use of human resources.
Okay. I think I understand that. So basically IP, the 20 years is an issue. So you jack up the prices, and after 20 years, you don't have any incentive to basically repurpose that drug anymore, right? So what about the funding issue? So you mentioned about the NIH funding, which is drying up potentially. What about it basically?
Yeah. So, and I'm less educated on how science is funded ex-US than I am how science is funded in the US. But the major science funding bodies in the US are predominantly the National Institute of Health, which deploys like tens of billions of dollars to academic research across academic labs in universities globally. They also give a bunch of startups money, and also the National Science Foundation. And so these are basically government associated entities that get taxpayer dollars and then go use those taxpayer dollars to go fund science, right? It sounds awesome in theory. And what's actually crazy is I think every single drug that got approved last year or in the last few years or something was funded by the NIH.
I see.
So it goes to show the money is being used somewhat well. That being said, the return on investment is not great. And it's because as a person who is deploying that capital, you're not really accountable to that money being put to the best use, right? You can make more money yourself, right? If the science you fund manifests in a valuable product that helps people, there's basically no accountability to ROI. It's really that simple, right? And so you have people deploying capital that are not inherently capitalists, right? They're government bureaucrats. And so I think that's really the problem. And so because they don't make money, based on the science they fund, you have to start to look at, well, what is their actual motivator? Do they care about the science, or are there potentially other incentives at play? One incentive that seems to be quite dominant is funding your friends. So a lot of these people that sit on the NIH funding councils, they fund people they have personal relationships with, right?
Course, yeah.
Or that help give them sort of social capital, right? Or potentially scientific social capital, whereby if I'm, a very well-known scientist and I've been, I was kind of the godfather of this specific area of research, I'm going to fund people that cite my papers, right? Or do research that supports my research and makes it seem like, the first stages of an early path of discovery that is still relevant. What I'm certainly not going to fund is people doing things that are non-consensus, that disagree with my view of how the science should work, right? And what my life's work discovered, right? And so I have no incentive as one of these people that is determining where capital flows. I have no incentive for it to be non-consensus, but right.
Yeah.
Which is actually the last thing you want for people that are deploying money at the earliest stages of discovery. You want to fund people doing audacious things, you know?
Yeah. So this is, I guess, public capital you're talking about in the US, right? Or what about like, so pharma has these kind of way of funding smaller biotech research labs, right? And I believe, again, just like the COVID vaccine and stuff, AstraZeneca and others were doing something similar where, yeah, they were, was it BioN or something like that, right?
Biotech.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So instead of like have this kind of centralized lab for Pfizer, centralized lab for, some of the big pharmaceuticals, you just kind of fund smaller labs, right? And so on and so forth, and spread bet basically your investments. So do you think that sort of funding makes sense? And is it just like public sort of funding you're trying to solve for?
Yeah, it's more of it's less about disrupting how pharma deploys capital, right? Like they have their incentives. Their incentives are to
make money, more money,
money, and that's okay. Yeah. And like if as long as the system is well designed and them making money is aligned with people being cured of diseases and living longer, then great. That isn't the case, but like if it were, then it would be great, right? What we're talking about and what we're trying to disrupt specifically is the earliest stages of innovation. So what you're talking about with BioNTech is like they already had the technology for the mRNA vaccine, the lipid nanoparticles that the RNA vaccine went into, that's just how it gets delivered throughout the body. Like that had already been developed. What they acquired was like an asset that was almost basically ready to go straight into trials. So yeah, no, what we're doing is not trying to disrupt so much the way that pharma invests into early stage research. It's much more into how research gets funded at the earliest stages, which right now is done by the state, like the government. So and yeah, and maybe coming back to like another issue that exists there is the NIH has specific diseases that it considers important, right? And they're largely correlated with what that disease burden is. What I mean is, if a disease is more rare, it gets less funding than a disease that's more prevalent. There are some major exceptions though. And I think the biggest exception for us that's relevant to like what we're working on at Pump.Science is aging, right? So the government, and specifically the NIH and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the US, they don't consider aging a disease, right? So there is a National Institute of Aging in the US. It gets like, I think 2 to 3% of total NIH funding, right? So most of the funding goes toward solving diseases once they manifest, not how do we potentially like alter our relationship to aging and like time as a means of kind of fending off diseases before they manifest.
Yeah. And this is something that's, I think, on the collective psyche, at least on Twitter and other platforms. I had Brian Johnson on the podcast come and talk about this basically. But from what I understand, like there's a lot of stuff which is anti-aging. It's more prevention rather than just drugs, basically, right? So you kind of do intermittent fasting or caloric deficits, basically. At least what the research says that mostly helps with anti-aging, right? Mostly whole foods. I think Huberman also talks about it and so on and so forth, right? So is this like, are you guys trying to promote early research drugs that help with anti-aging? Is that what you guys are doing?
That's precisely correct. So I think what you talked about is like lifestyle factors and, food products that affect our speed of aging. But what we're specifically focused on, and maybe because it's just being so neglected by the existing system, is, what supplements should we be taking every day, right? That prevent disease. So, there are things you can do like, change your relationship to food, what foods you eat, when you eat, how much you eat, right? But there's also important vitamins and supplements that you should be taking every day that probably improve your lifespan, right? And some of them are well known and some of them are natural, but there's probably a lot that haven't been discovered yet. And the question is, who's even trying? And the answer is like practically nobody, right? Even the like anti-aging longevity biotech companies are developing drugs for diseases. So I think what we're trying to do is solve this like gaping hole, which is like discovery for just general supplements that help you live longer. They don't cure a disease, right? They don't solve, they're not going to be covered by insurance, but people want them. Like if you told me that there was a pill that I could take every day that costs $1 and it gives me an extra, 6 months of life or a year of life, like that's precious time.
Yeah.
Precious time.
Yeah, that makes sense, really. So let's come to, I guess, Pump.Science and like Molecule, and you can explain what both are basically for the audience. But we mentioned about the problems, right, basically, which is the IP issue as well as the funding issue, right? So what are you guys doing at Pump.Science and Molecule, and how does that relate to the problems that we talked about?
100%. So the tech that Molecule has built that we're using on Pump.Science is tokenizing intellectual property. Basically what that means is we take intellectual property like legal agreements, so that like proof of invention or that legal document that secures you those IP rights that a court will basically enforce, that gives you the rights to an invention. We turn that into a token. And then actually what we end up doing is we turn it into a bunch of tokens that can be traded. So you have a bunch of like tradable tokens that represent fractional pieces of this invention.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say, like, just to bring it to life, say I've got a drug that makes me run faster, let's just say. So I basically patented that drug, right? So I've got a piece of document from the government or whatever administration. I go to a Molecule and I basically upload my documents and you generate a token based on that. Is that correct?
So you upload it, we generate a token, and then another piece is very important, which is you sign a document, a new one, that assigns your legal rights to the invention. It assigns them to the token.
Okay.
You're basically saying, I no longer hold these rights. Whoever holds this token holds the rights.
Okay. So the ownership becomes like shared by token holders.
Correct.
And not you anymore.
Correct. But if you just want to hold your rights, but on the blockchain, then you can
just buy like 80% of the supply,
or never part ways with it, right? Right. Never sell it.
Okay. Interesting.
So that is what Molecule does, right?
Okay.
And we can get into like the benefits of that, but it actually gets pretty crazy the deeper you go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
But what we're doing with Pump.Science is we're trying to find the right application of that technology. Now that we can tokenize intellectual property, what do we do with it? We've got a bazooka. Where do we point it?
Yeah.
And we think that this whole problem of nobody's researching, longevity drugs is a huge problem. And, my parents are asking me, like, I'm trained in science. So like, and they know that I care about longevity. And so they ask me all the time, like, what should I be taking every day? They're getting older and they want to know, like, how do I get more time? Right. And the truth of the matter is that it's very difficult to give them a straight answer because the research is all over the place. It's conflicting. You talk to, a few scientists, you get, as many answers as there are scientists, right? Nobody seems to agree on, these very important and basic questions. And so we're trying to build a system that just gets the answers. And so basically any scientist from all over the world can submit ideas for compounds to test. They tokenize that idea with the technology, the IP tokenization technology. And then they can fundraise for it with crypto. And then we open up markets for the tokens, those IP tokens. And then, we launch the experiments.
Yeah.
And the experiments are basically just like testing that drug or compound on different animals and
Yeah.
seeing if they live longer.
Yeah. And how do you like ensure the actual science behind it, basically, right? And the robustness of the actual science behind it, right? So usually, like, if you're a badass researcher in the traditional institutions, you write papers and so on and so forth, you get citations, blah blah, you build a track record, right? Like, how does the token part and the IP part sort of relate to actually making sure that the science is robust and it's progressing well, basically, right?
Yeah, so the token doesn't change any of it. The token accelerates the funding
Sure.
and
Okay.
it enables the transfer of rights,
Okay.
very seamlessly.
Okay.
But it doesn't change anything about ensuring that the experiment gets run. That is another opportunity of DeSci that we are not specifically tackling yet. We are trying to focus on the IP and the funding components first. But what you're talking about, which is just like verifying that the science happened, we're doing at a very superficial level, which is streaming the data. So like most of our experiments are just done and streamed in real time. So basically as if you're like watching a sports game, right? As soon as we get the data from the lab, we send it to the website and you can go watch it. So it's not necessarily us, there's still a layer of trust, which is us as the platform. But what we've done is we've gone and found very reputable labs to run the experiments for us. And we've kind of disintermediated ourselves from presenting the data. So it's really the labs that just basically send data directly to our website. And so they're kind of streaming directly to our users. And this is kind of the vision that we have, which is basically our site is just like a funding layer and a streaming site for scientific experiments.
Yeah.
People can watch them like unfold in real time. And hopefully over time, we'll earn the trust of users that the experiments are getting done. But there is a layer of trust that's absolutely required. But the goal is to verify each like component of the experiment. But we think that problem is secondary.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. I mean, for me, that's also like a hugely important aspect, right? Because or else it's just going to be like whatever's popular, I don't know, like populist science versus like actual science, right? The whole point of science is ensuring the experiments are, robust, right? But yeah, I understand that that's a different set of problems and stuff. One other thing I think I was wondering about basically is that, so you mentioned about how you fractionalize the IP, i.e., like previously I used to own that IP for that drug that makes you run faster. Now, like 10,000 other people do because it's on chain and they've bought the token for that drug, right? So in this world of fractionalized IP, I mean, how do I defend my IP basically? Like, and yeah, how does it govern basically? Right?
Yeah, it's such a good question. How do you defend it? Like historically, we've used courts as the execution layer of the rules, right? And so in this digital world, like what is the execution layer, right? And it's very difficult to describe now because of the world that we live in. But maybe if you want to vision cast a bit. In the future, I think, anybody who's leaning into technology would acknowledge that, crypto is the ultimate payment rail, right? And the future of payments are almost guaranteed to be like crypto in the future, probably 100%. It's so much better than any other form of money that we've used, right? So if at the end of the day, IP defensibility is really about monetization, right? And being able to capture the commercial value from products you create. I think that's number one. Number two, what you were asking, which is how do we verify that the science is actually getting done? And this whole, in the future, most things will be verified on chain, right? So if I end up receiving a product, the entire supply chain will be verified, right? So you'll know exactly what was made, where it came from, et cetera, et cetera. So if you know who was paid for what, and you also know what you're consuming and where it came from,
Mm-hmm.
you should be able to see, was IP respected? Was it, was the IP being infringed? Is this person selling a substance that they don't have the rights to?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That the IP owner didn't authorize them to. That should be verifiable digitally. And so in that way, in that future world that we don't live in yet, everything can be rules-based and code-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have this execution layer that's blockchain-based where you can enforce IP. That's the future answer. What the intermediate steps to get there are, I think, are going to be very confusing, and a mix of this digital and traditional system where token holders band together and sue in people that are infringing. So I think it'll get very Frankenstein in the middle. But where we are now is probably clear to people, and hopefully from like that kind of vision, people understand where this is going. And so that's the end state. But in the middle, to anyone's guess what it looks like. Yeah,
that makes sense, really. So like if I guess if I know, by the way, that I've got like a killer drug, like a killer IP, I don't want to share that with like 10,000 other holders and stuff, right? So what's the incentive there to actually go to Pump.Science and submit the idea, basically?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, like, if you're very, very confident in that you can get your piece of IP funded, then you don't need us. And you don't need us, and that's okay. But if you're not super confident, and you want to share the risk with others, and you also want to like market for your IP, right? So if we become this massive streaming layer for science, there's going to be a lot of eyes on it. And so if you have a banger piece of IP, you want maximum distribution. And so you want to showcase to as many people who are watching, these experiments unfold and like watching which ones are winning, you want to show that you're the best, right? And be the top of the leaderboard. My supplement extends lifespan the most, right? So you kind of create this competition game, and people love competitions. People love winning, right? And so by creating this kind of public, out in the open competition to extend life, if you have a banger idea, you should want to prove it, right? You should want to put it into the arena because you're confident it'll win, right? And that's great marketing for you, right? It's just like automatic distribution to the exact people that you want to distribute the end product to. So that's a big reason why. And it requires a positive sum mentality that, not everyone may have. And so it doesn't serve all use cases, but we think it's an interesting experiment to try and serves a lot of use cases.
Okay. And just for our audience, basically, right? So those who are not crypto native, so these tokens, quote unquote, I cannot find this on a centralized exchange like Coinbase and so on and so forth, right? I have to go to DEX or decentralized exchanges and try to get it. Is that correct?
That's correct. So I think you put the distinction well, which is there are kind of like two types of exchanges in crypto. There are regulated centralized exchanges where you input your personal information. They typically like require your driver's license or your passport. They can only let you trade certain tokens. They don't let you trade anything. And so they only list a subset of tokens that trade, on these different blockchains. A decentralized exchange is somewhat permissionless. So basically, as long as you pay the fee, you can basically put your token onto this exchange where people can discover it and it can trade, and anyone can trade it. And you don't need to put in your personal information. You just need to connect your crypto wallet and you can immediately start trading. And so that is where you'll find a lot of our assets, because none of the IP tokens have been listed on it. Actually, no, that's a lie. I'm lying. There are a bunch of centralized exchanges that have listed our tokens. They're maybe not as well known. One's called Bybit. Another,
okay. The one that got hacked.
The one that got hacked today.
Today, yeah. 2 hours ago.
Two of our tokens, I think, are on Bybit futures.
Okay.
And can be traded there. So KuCoin, MEXC, there are several exchanges that have some of our tokens listed. not all
Okay.
of them.
Okay. That's pretty interesting. So let me ask you this, right? And I'm going to be quite honest with the feedback from folks, that I've seen on crypto Twitter and so on and so forth. So a lot of people say that decentralized kind of medicine, or this whole industry, DeSci is a scam, basically, right? So what do you kind of say to them, basically? Like like what's like, I think what they base their argument on is that cryptocurrencies are quite speculative in nature, right? And you might have a drug or not, and you just put it out there, and you're just kind of giving it to the market to decide what the price of that token should be, right? It goes up and up and up, and then someone can rug pull that all the way to zero, basically, right? So I think that's the claim, that it's just a scam, basically, right? So yeah, what's your reaction to that, and how do you sort of address some of those trust issues that people have?
I think those trust issues will exist for a long time, and it's on us to earn the trust. So I'm not saying that, we deserve the trust without earning it. And so I'm not going to sit here and try and say we're not scammers, but time will tell. And hopefully we will show over time that we're trustworthy and we're running cool science. We are developing products that are valuable, and we will earn that trust. So with the thing they say about scammers is they really try and convince you that they're not a scammer. So, I'm not going to sit here and tell you for X, Y, and Z reasons why we're not scammers. I'm just going to show people that we're honest, that we really our hearts are with the science and, changing the world, and not just grifting, right? There's so much grifting in crypto. It's frankly my least favorite part about the industry, because it's basically programming money, right?
Yeah.
And so when you do that, that's where grifters are attracted to. And so we're obviously like trying to fight for legitimacy in a space full of scammers and grifters, but we know we have to earn our way out of it, that it's not just granted, and we're prepared to do that.
Yeah. And that makes sense from the perspective of what you can control, right? But if the token is out there for a certain compound, for a certain research project, there's the market and this tendency of crypto investors to dump something after 3 months and move to the next one, right? And just because they can, right? It's easily tradable, these tokens and so on and so forth. It's all vibes, basically, right? Like whatever's vibing right now, it just pumps up. Whatever's vibing down. So why would you want to delegate super important, life-changing, world-changing research projects, which can take a long time, right? Which can take like years, to these degenerate, quote-unquote, investors, right? So on and so forth, who just kind of dump stuff after 2 months and move to the next one, right? So how do you kind of, how do you kind of square that peg round hole, basically?
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's such a hard problem. It's such a good question. I think maybe let's try like reframe it a bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
A lot of this meme coin speculation, degenerate behavior is on meme coins that hold literally no real world value beyond that they're funny.
Yeah.
Right. And that they form communities. And you could say that there's some value there. I think it's pretty minimal. Most people are just speculating and want to make money. If we can redirect any of that energy towards something that's like potentially world changing or potentially creates, life extending medicine, why would we not try? I think it's going to be very difficult to try and fund this research otherwise. If there was, it probably would have been done, right? All the existing tools are there, but it's not really happening. And so we are trying to see, can we redirect and channel some of that speculative energy towards something potentially world-changing? And it's hard, right? Because I'm with you. And like, look, we've launched tokens into this space. And, one day people are excited about it. Another day they're not. And all the while they're coming to us being like, why is the token going down? and it's like, I don't know, the science is working. Like the data looks fantastic. Like the compound that we're testing is extending the life of flies and the token's going down, it's the industry we're in, and we will have to figure out how to make this entertaining and create entertainment value, and also try and figure out ways to gamify it such that the token price is tied to the scientific data.
Correct.
And we're doing that as best as we can. And so at every opportunity we can, we are tying the price to the data. And we're going to continue to do that so that it's much more gamified, right? Where we get people to care about the quality of the data, because, if they are being degenerate speculators, that is aligned with productive research being done.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any innovative ways to do it where for every every successful experiment, a percentage of the supply is just burned, So yeah, that way you have less number of those tokens left after every, and then that kind of gives,
it's brilliant.
Rejects the price. I don't know. I'm just saying, yeah.
It is a brilliant idea. What we have decided is ultimately what matters most is not the data looking a certain way, but a person buying the product, right? If somebody is convinced that something is valuable enough to buy it, then we will buy back and burn the tokens. And so this isn't inherent to like how the tokens are programmed, but all the token holders can vote for this. But what they can enable is, if the supplement is sold, then the token holders that hold the IP that basically enabled that product, the tokens can be bought back and burned to reduce the supply, exactly as you said.
That'll be pretty interesting. Yeah. And really looking forward to seeing what you guys do in that space. So I'm currently on the Pump.Science page, and I can see 3 of these compounds listed: rifampicin, urolithin A. So firstly, I guess, tell the audience, like, what's the current product look like right now? And then what's the roadmap like for you guys going forward?
100%. So what we have developed is a token launchpad that allows anyone with an idea for a different supplement to test on animals. They can submit that idea and they can tokenize
test
it
on animals. Yeah.
To test on animals.
So is that what, there's like stages of research, right? There's phase 2 or something like that. Clinical trials. I don't know what's it called.
Yeah. There's clinical stage research, which is like the drug is in humans.
I see.
It starts off being tested for safety, and then it gets tested, on larger and larger groups, also for efficacy to see if it works. But what we're doing first is what we call preclinical testing, which is just, testing on animals is what we're focused on. And so, we're trying to see, can someone come up with an idea for how to extend life, and can we show that it works on animals before we give it to people, right? And so what we have built is a launchpad for these different ideas, and then a way to fundraise for those ideas with trading. So all people do is just trade the tokens, and the trading fees are what funds the research. So there isn't it's not like a crowdfunding platform, so to speak. It's literally just if you click on one of the compounds, you get taken to the trading view. And the tokens just trade on the open market. Yeah, Bitcoin is tanking right now because Bybit got hacked. And taking all of our tokens with it. Not pretty.
There's a lot of sell here.
Yeah, a lot of selling going on. But the whole market seems to be kind of getting crushed at the moment. But besides the point. The point is, you can come here, you can trade tokens, and the trading fees fund the research. That's the important point, and that's what we think is pretty cool. So trading fees are otherwise, just going to either nobody or whoever provided the liquidity. It's just straight, revenue for them. We're taking the vast majority of the fees that are generated and putting it to fund the research and keep the keep the research going. And so if you scroll down, what you'll see is you're on the fly experiment.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, there you go.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Well, no, go back there. So I think that's also another important
the data
component.
view? Okay.
Yeah, so what we've built is like the trading component, then that's for fundraising. And what you're looking at is urolithin A, which, as you can see, extended the lifespan of flies by 20%.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And that's a natural compound that you find in pomegranate seeds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Which
I
is
love
super
pomegranates. Yeah.
Yeah. Keep eating them. They've got urolithin A in them. Anyway, so what you're looking at over there is, I think that's basically the last video of the flies who are dead, unfortunately.
See.
But this is the end. So this is, you see 1870 out of 1870 at the bottom.
Yeah.
So basically, like, what we do is, as videos are taken of the flies, we literally send them to the site, and they get taken there. They get videoed for 5 minutes per hour, their entire lives, and we stream all of the data to users. So scroll up if you don't mind, and go to the chart view. No, scroll down.
Oh, sorry.
It's all good. No, a little bit up. So right next to feed, it's chart. Exactly. Yeah. So that is their lifespan. So what you're looking at of a curve right there is, at each point in time, how many animals are still alive in each group. And because you see it, for people who are watching, you can see that the compound, which here is urolithin A, extended the life of these flies. More flies were alive, at basically every time point beyond 50 days, relative to the control. So we got a statistically significant result, and this increases the lifespan of flies, which we think is pretty cool. So we got the count on there, which is basically like, are they alive and dead? And then if you, next to that, you'll see speed.
Yeah.
See speed and distance. Yeah. So what you'll also see is that urolithin A made the flies move faster. So like basically at every time point, pretty much every single time point, the flies that were receiving urolithin A move faster than the flies that are receiving control. And speed is kind of a, kind of indirect measurement of like health span. And here they seem to be correlated. So not only do the flies move faster, but they live longer.
Okay. And they travel higher distances as well, I guess.
No, they didn't.
Didn't?
But anyway, this is science. Like, not all the data points always agree. But we did get a significant result on speed and lifespan.
Okay.
But not on distance.
That's pretty cool, though. I have to say, by the way, like, I never checked the data view. I always came to the trading view before. I've seen Pump.Science and these first compounds, I think like even 2 months ago, actually. But I was always in the trading view. I never knew that there was like a data view. But this is quite cool. And did I see like papers here somewhere, or files? Yeah. So are these like actual research, like you're publishing on journals and stuff like that, or?
Yeah, we may publish these findings 100%. I think the idea is, publishing in journals is, useful when you want to distribute the content. We've already got people to distribute this content to. Oh yeah, we'll go over the mice experiments in a sec. Yeah, we'll get there in a second. Yeah, they're fun. The mice experiments are fun. But basically, the important piece here is we've already got the distribution. If people care, they can come to our site and they can see the data for themselves. What publication is it's just like an editorial of the data, right? That we're going to try and tell a story around it. And so really, like, we think that this is the new way to like publish scientific data, which is just like live in real time. You don't have to deal with the publishers who are very difficult to work with, very slow, very expensive. We would rather just like live stream the experiments.
Yeah. But would you say that one of the other benefits of publishing the paper is that so that other people can try to replicate, and the more they can replicate, the more robust the science is, basically, right?
Absolutely. I think the important piece here is the kind of constituents of a paper are like the abstract, the methods, the results, and the discussion, and the graphs. right? We talk about in our docs all the methodology. We talk about exactly how the experiments are run.
Okay.
And the results are right there in front of your face, right? What we don't have is like a discussion section where we talk about it, and we like talk about the background behind this drug. And we've got this about section here, which you could kind of analogize to like the introduction section of a paper. We do not have a discussion. The discussion for us happens on Twitter, right?
I see.
So really it's but here's the reality, which is, yes, scientists read papers, maybe some non-scientists read papers, but the vast majority of people don't read scientific papers. And we want them to care about the science. And so how do we deliver it to them in a more entertaining and engaging way?
Yeah.
That is what we're in pursuit of. We don't know what the answer is. We're trying, and we're going to keep iterating until we can get people excited.
Yeah, I mean, and this goes back to the trust question, and is DeSci a scam kind of question basically at the beginning, right? So I guess there's two problems you're trying to solve here. One is like scientific credibility, and the other is, I guess, democratizing access to, everybody in terms of funding as well as the science, right? For me, like, this looks great, by the way. Like, this is super amazing. It all pretty much brings it in front and center, and all the data and all that stuff. It would be quite interesting to me to see what sort of interface this has with the current scientific processes, right? If you're like a legitimate researcher in a lab, right, somewhere, how do you sort of interact with Pump.Science, basically, right? I don't know the answer to that, basically, as in, like, can you publish something here or vice versa, where you can contribute to some of the threads of the research here, basically, and build more on top of that? Yeah, I feel like there's something interesting there about the traditional methodology of science, through Google Scholar and papers and stuff like that, journals being inputted here. So this becomes like the new norm, right? Of scientific credibility. There's some bridging to do, basically. Yeah.
We need to onboard scientists so badly.
Yeah.
And we're doing it slowly but surely. And I think one way to think about what you're talking about which is like, where does the discussion happen? How do scientists engage on this? How do they give commentary? We're trying to push all of that on Twitter. That's where most of our user base is. It's where a lot of interesting discussion about science happens anyway, right?
Are there scientists on Twitter, though? Like real scientists?
Absolutely. I just don't think you follow them.
Yeah, it seems like it. Yeah,
they're not on your feed.
I just follow coin holders, basically.
Exactly. And so, like, I think the important piece is, like, everyone's feed is tailored to their interests, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we forget often that there's so many other people with different interests whose feeds look completely different to ours, right? There are a ton of scientists on Twitter. There's a lot of really interesting scientific conversations happening on Twitter. Some of my favorites are honestly like biotech companies have to publish their data. And so like there are a lot of like really interesting biotech analysts that will just like analyze the science, analyze the stock price, and basically, give financial advice without giving financial advice, but grounded in the science. And to me, this is the most interesting user type that I want on this platform, which is somebody who understands the fundamentals and is a degen at heart, and wants to monetize their knowledge and capture the value that they create. And I think that's beautiful. And those are the users that we want to bring on. And we want them to talk on Twitter, where they already are. We want them to be able to scrutinize the data out in the public. And we want them to be able to permissionlessly trade these tokens and send them to each other and incentivize them to collaborate. And that's the future that we envision. And we hope that people are excited about that and come along.
Yeah, that's beautiful, really. One of the questions that was asked by one of the audience members was basically, so in the traditional institutional model of science, you've got these career progressions, right? You've got grants, tenure, publications, and if you put your article in a high banger journal, it can really propel your career forward, so on and so forth. So when it comes to DeSci, what does the sort of viable alternative look like for researchers in the future, basically, in terms of recognition and incentives and how you do research outside institutions? Like, do you have any ideas on that?
100%. I think the question becomes, what is the new game that they play, right? In a world where they're not competing for all of like tenure, what are they competing for, right? And I think the reality is that like these games that you're talking about, they transcend technology. And so in fact, DeSci kind of needs to replicate the same games, right? Digitally that exist, in the physical, like traditional academic world. People love, having a good social reputation, and having social capital and having influence, right? And having resources to study what they want to study, right? And having freedom to, research whatever it is they want. And so I think it's really about giving all of those same opportunities, but just in a system where the incentives are aligned with, human benefit, right? More so than whatever the heck they're incentivized for now. Incentivizing them to generate products that people want, right?
Yeah.
And, I think there is this difference between like looking for knowledge and trying to create products.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that there's a big difference there. But as much as, I think another important piece is that like researchers do follow the funding. Like Patrick Collison, like the founder of Stripe.
Yeah.
He did this program called Fast Grants during COVID, where they just like slung money at anyone doing COVID research. And they gave a survey to the people that they gave money to. And it was like the vast majority of them said that they would change what they were studying if the funding conditions weren't the way they were,
Interesting.
So it just goes to show like people aren't actually, acting on their best ideas. And we're talking about the best ideas of the best minds.
Yeah.
That we have to offer. And so I think really what we want is to give freedom to these like brilliant minds. And if they can sell their ideas or find influencers who can sell it for them, and then individuals can directly fund them and say, I buy into that idea, I want to support that, then I think we're going to live in a much better system than a bunch of bureaucrats funding their friends.
Yeah, that makes sense, really. So I just have like two more questions and then happy to wrap up, basically. So specifically on, urolithin A, we were looking at. So what is the next step for urolithin in this case? So it's been a median life? Okay, I mean, it's shown like 20% more life extension in insects, right? Or flies. What's the next step for these compounds here, basically? Yeah.
Do you mind pulling back up the UI?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there you go.
Well, so, you'll see in the UI, so scroll back up to the top, and on the right, you'll see mice. There's worms, flies, and mice. So in this little game, right, level 1 is the worms. Wait a second, that doesn't look right.
Sort of refresh page. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, there we go. So level 1 is worms, level 2 is flies, and level 3 is mice.
Okay. And then humans,
And then humans are next, right? So the humans are level 4. So for worms and flies, we test longevity, right? We just test their lifespan. How long do they live? Do the compounds make them live longer? Mice live a pretty long time, like 2 years in the lab. It's too long to keep crypto user attention.
Yeah, 2 years is...
So that's like a cycle in crypto. Good luck keeping their attention. So we pulled them and we asked, what should we test the mice for? And they said endurance. So here you are looking at a test of endurance on mice. And so what we've done here is we are giving basically urolithin A or control to mice, and you are seeing, can you make them run for longer? And so what you're seeing here is doesn't seem to be the case, at least yet. So the compounds are not making the mice, run further, or have more endurance. So we're still mid-experiment. There's no, it's not over yet. But this is the data, right?
Okay. So this is an example where you're having to shoehorn the research proposals or where it's going based on like the investor structure, basically, right? And the fact that they have short attention spans means you have to pivot from, what was it, like lifespan to endurance, basically, right?
It's a combination of factors, one of which is attention and attention span, right? Another factor is cost. To run a lifespan test on a mouse is not cheap. This test that you're looking at already is insanely expensive.
I see.
Much more than you think it would be. Running a lifespan test on mice is also very expensive. So it's a combination of the cost and the speed and the attention.
Okay.
Now, we have spoken with a lot of scientists, geoscientists, basically longevity scientists, and they've all said this is an absolutely valid experiment to run. It's well validated, meaning it's run by a ton of different labs who all agree that this is a somewhat decent surrogate for lifespan in the animals. Is it perfect? No. Is it correlated? Definitely.
I see.
Definitely. So endurance is a good kind of surrogate for lifespan. And what you're looking at here are not young mice. They're aged mice. So when we got them, they're 76 weeks old, about a year and a half, right? So they're basically well into their life as a mouse. That's our telegram. Telegram.
That's the bot. Yeah.
And so, what you're looking at here is aged mice. And so we're basically trying to see here what kind of improves the endurance in an older mouse. That probably is something that's kind of like reversing the aging phenotype.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, like if you're more active and have better endurance, let's just say, it just means that you've got a better chance of a health span, right?
Exactly. And lifespan. Both are important. But one of the best correlates for humans of how long you'll live is called VO2 max. And it's basically it represents, your endurance. So, the best like Ironman triathletes will have VO2 maxes in the 80s. Your average person is probably in like the 30s and 40s.
Sure.
Fit in your 50s. So, but this number is just very well correlated with lifespan.
So it seems like, you start with worms and then flies and then mice here, you're trying to measure for endurance basically, right? And it doesn't seem like the compound has any effect on endurance, actually negative, it seems. So what does that mean for that compound? Like, does it like stop here is that the end of the experiment? Or
the way the protocol works is if it reduces the endpoint, meaning if it hurts endurance, then it is not advanced.
Okay.
If it helps endurance or does not hurt endurance, then it is also advanced. So we basically have like a checkpoint on the data to say like, is this maybe harmful? If so, then, it doesn't advance. But if it does, we advance it. Okay. And so, look, this may be just like a statistical anomaly, Other people have run this exact experiment on mice with this exact compound and found the opposite result. So anyway, we're in the middle of this. I think time will tell, if this is the final result, but this is science, and this is why
there's failures.
Replication is it's why replication is so important.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. No, 100%. Cool. Sounds great. One last thing I just want to kind of know about before I let you go. So, what does the near-term roadmap look like for Pump.Science? Like, what new features are you guys thinking about right now? Yeah, what's the
100%. So I think we have a lot of innovation to do on the crypto side of things. So we have to automate a significant amount of like how, tokens move between accounts. Some of it's manual at the moment. We're changing that right now. We're trying to optimize the incentive structure for all of the different users. So a lot of it is like one way to think about crypto is you're trying to like engineer incentives, right? It's basically like, you're in the finance department of a company. And it's like, who do we pay how much, and how do we structure bonuses, and how do we incentivize the company's success with this person's success? So that's called like mechanism design. It's basically like engineering incentives. And so a lot of what we're doing is around that for specifically, submitting high quality science, funding high quality science. And yeah, so basically a lot of the features are around that. We also want to bring in the capability to do human studies. So that's like on the roadmap as well. We are also developing an e-commerce store to buy the supplements once they're developed.
I see.
Right. So that's the way to bring the value back to the token holders is through sales of products. So
That'll
that's
be cool.
certainly like on the roadmap and like in development. I can go look at the backlog of stuff and like what we're working on right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a combination of enabling more science, making the existing science more engaging. And then the last piece is just the crypto component, right? So
Okay.
just optimizing the way that we interact with the blockchain, like our applications and our users interact with the blockchain, achieves the desired endpoints, right? So that users who predict, which compounds will extend life are rewarded.
Yeah.
And those who submit compounds that extend life are rewarded, right? And making sure that, one huge problem in crypto is like sniper bots. So, trying to like remove the effect of people that are just trying to take advantage of the system and people trading and, take advantage of people. We're trying to reduce that as well. And so, this is kind of the battle, which is like when there's money on the table and you're dealing with crypto, people are, coming for your life. And so that's also, a lot of bad actors. And so all of these things are important, but it's kind of, as I said, like bringing new science in, making the existing science more fun to watch, bringing entertainment value to it so that intrinsically, like it's just fun to follow. And then, making the trading experiences better, and then just scaling it, right? Just more and more studies getting done, just more science, like like in a very morbid way, like we're dying. We need better longevity supplements, right? And we need them yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So, just scaling the whole thing.
Yeah, no, it sounds really great. I'm super excited to see where you guys go. Longevity is such an important thing, and I love how you guys are sort of democratizing and putting out there like most of the data and stuff like that for the whole world to see, and really changing the landscape, right, of how science gets funded and done, and how you create drugs and so on and so forth.
See.
Right?
We'll see.
So, yeah,
trying our hardest.
Brilliant. Yeah. Exciting.
Market will decide.
Market will decide, indeed. Benji, thanks a lot for coming to the podcast. It was an amazing pleasure to have you on, but all the best with what you guys are doing.
I got you. Really appreciate the time. Thanks for all your great questions, and we'll talk soon, man.
Amazing.